All right, we are now recording. So this is where I go. All right. Hello. I'm Jonathan Burnham. I'm posting this on YouTube. Got two channels, so if you're seeing it on Dead Man Walking, the other one is just under my name. Putting this out there for my friends from the sim racing community that have they know me. Uh, I'm Jonathan Burnham. They know I have cancer. Uh, and that this is way off topic from my normal channel. What I'm doing today is something I had been kind of working on. I'd gone back to school for philosophy uh, at Marquette University, but health has gotten in the way, and this project I wanted to work on make it more of an academic kind of dissertation. Um, it's not going to happen. I don't have time. So what we're doing today is I have with me today Dr. Fraser Snowden. He's a retired professor from the University of Northwestern State University in Louisiana. He was my professor as an undergraduate in philosophy and at the Louisiana Scholars College. He's also been my friend, and we talk regularly. And he's going to try and help me stay on course so that this doesn't go too long. The goal here is to keep it around 45 minutes, so this isn't going to be in detail. And understand that this is going to be more armchair philosophy, not full academic blowout with sourcing. I just don't have the energy in me today to do a whole lot of reading and writing and sourcing and research, sadly. So I'm going to have to go off of mostly memory and my experience and kind of relate why this experience matters. You have anything to say, Fraser?
No, it's just very nice to be with you today, Jonathan. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. And, I think sometimes just a kind of informal, freewheeling discussion means a lot more to many people than a more academic approach. So I think you were smart in wanting to keep this just rather informal. But you have
Yeah.
some great ideas, and I think it's wonderful that you're going to share them with friends and other people.
Well, I think that's a good jumping off point too to mention that a big part of this too is to leave something for my children. Uh, that I know my time is now limited with how my cancer is advanced, and doing this gives them some kind of insight to kind of my inner thought process, but also leaves a challenge behind for them, uh, based on what we're going to talk about. Not just to live life, but to engage with life, engage with morality, engage with knowledge. Uh, and just stay full. Don't look away. You know, and to be humble and to move forward. And that's part of that is my real goal is to leave that behind for them. Given that I most likely, barring a miracle, won't be there for them.
I don't think they will cherish this. They may not understand it now because they're very young, but in years to come, I think they will be very, very glad that they have this record of your thoughts and your voice and your presence.
Okay. So kind of the idea here is the philosophical idea I'm going to be looking at is Albert Camus' The Absurd and a kind of expansion on it. So we're not talking about a kind of confrontational uh, discussion about Camus, but more when I went back to school and Fraser had recommended Camus to me and I read it and it kind of I had this affinity with it, but it was just something missing. And the seed for my idea actually didn't start with going back to school for philosophy. It actually started when I went through a really rough period in my life uh, where I was having an existential crisis. no way other way to put it. Life just didn't seem to have meaning beyond some, like, the only thing I could really latch on to at the time was my children, and I knew that wasn't healthy for them or for me. But I went down this narcissistic rabbit hole. You go online, you read all these things. This is what a narcissist is. This is narcissistic abuse, and blah blah blah. And I was trying to make sense of things that were going on in my life. And then I kind of had an epiphany where I woke up one day and looked around me and realized that everything that was getting attributed to a narcissist was happening all around me by people we wouldn't consider narcissists. And it was like, okay, why is this happening? And I don't want to go too far into that, but I did come up with a theory then that had to do with how we value each other as human beings, how we value ourselves in relationship to each other, and how that goes astray. Like, we can all say we have the principle that we're all created equal, yet at the same time, you end up in this place where almost unconsciously, where you start valuing yourself more than others, or you'll be around someone else you value more than yourself, and you'll let them dictate your behavior. And a lots of times, this behavior can be abusive. Sometimes it's just in a moment, like we all weak. We all find ourselves where we feel entitled to something sometimes, or entitled to an idea, and then just out of nowhere, we'll start mistreating somebody. So that was the seed for where we started. But I guess, before, continuing to talk about that, we should probably talk about Albert Camus and what the absurd is before diving into any other, or what his philosophy is, what that he calls the absurd, uh, why it matters, and then why I feel it's too narrow.
I think that's a good idea. And Camus was considered an existentialist philosopher. Existentialism is a movement that uh, sort of got started back in the 30s and 40s of the previous century. And there were precursory figures, though. There were figures like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky, writers, philosophers who dealt with some of these issues that the existential philosophers, primarily Jean-Paul Sartre, Gabriel Marcel, Camus, dealt with. There's no real simple definition of existentialism. There are many different existentialisms. In fact, uh, some people, many people, do not even consider Camus, strictly speaking, an existential philosophy. He's more of a humanist.
I believe he didn't consider himself
No,
an
he didn't
existential.
consider
Like,
himself,
he
but
got an award for it in the existentialist category, and I think it was a literary award. And he's like, I guess he wasn't too thrilled with being labeled an existentialist.
right.
I think
But
humanist philosophy was probably
yeah,
a
he was
good.
he was more of a humanist. But a lot of the themes, for example, the concept of the absurd that he dealt with, are things that the existentialists, the other existential philosophers, dealt with. But so, Jonathan, what specific books by him, novels or essays that you have read, are relevant to your interest in his concept of the absurd?
Well, I think a lot of them. Specifically, the myth of Sisyphus itself. I've and I read the plague. I've read the fall, rebellion, his papers on resistance and the death penalty, and then the rebel. And I found he kept running into a certain problem, uh, based on, like, he had this idea of the absurd man, but what comes out of the myth of Sisyphus, uh, created a kind of problem for him that I think I can solve. Uh, I guess to give a little bit more background on Camus, is he was a French revolutionary journalist in World War II. Uh, so he was putting his life on the line, writing and printing,
Part of the resistance
part
movement
of the
against the
resistance.
Nazis. Yeah.
We already mentioned he was a philosopher. Him and Jean Paul Sartre had a very close friendship for a period before it fell apart. And then, he was a big fiction writer. Uh, he was born in Algeria, French colonial Algeria. So that he kind of considered that his home, and that specific thing would lead to him and John Paul Sartre's falling out. I'm not a super historic buff on it, but I've read enough of articles about about their falling out. The so I guess it's good to start with the myth of Sisyphus, right? It's good to start with what is the absurd, because as we were talking about existentialism, for him the primary problem of existentialism was nihilism. And in the myth of Sisyphus, he just goes directly to the source, the problem of suicide. If life has no meaning, then why bother?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, he says that suicide is the only real ultimate philosophical issue or question.
yeah,
And
you can almost turn the question back on it to why live, right?
yeah,
And what he came to with the absurd is he accused a lot of the philosophers before him. They're providing solutions, right, for nihilism. In a sense, he is too, but he's not giving you the answer. The absurd is uh, humanity's desire for unity of meaning, i.e., knowing what our purpose, what our meaning is in this world, and the universe's refusal to absolutely give it to us. That there's this gap that just no matter what we do, we can't cross that gap. So we're always yearning to have, this unity of meaning that gives our lives meaning. And and God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, just won't give it to us. That we're stuck with it. And his solution to this was not to, was it Kierkegaard, right? Solution was the religious life, I
the
believe,
leap of faith,
belief of faith, right?
blind leap of faith, right?
The blind leap of faith. Uh, Camus' solution to this is to accept it and live with it. However, that still leaves the question of suicide. If we just accept this, then why bother? So, so he spends a whole book. Not going to go into too much detail, but ultimately comes to a solution that rebellion is the answer. Rebellion against the gods, against the universe, against death itself. That, Sisyphus in the myth was punished by the gods because he had been released from hell to go do a task and instead ran off and just continued to live his life. And the gods were angry, so they punished him to live forever, pushing a boulder up a hill, and then it would fall all the way down, and that was the rest of him in eternity. And of course, the meme that comes out of this is imagine Sisyphus happy because he lives. He keeps rebelling against the gods, that against death, against the universe itself. Uh, I think I don't want to go into too much detail in it. I'll admit I'll agree with it that there is an element of life's worth living, that you don't have to have this overarching meaning of life for it to matter. I don't necessarily agree entirely with how he gets there, and we'll discuss that kind of in a little bit. That he live life the most is quantity of life. Live it as much as you can. Uh, and he was very big into art. Uh, you had the Don Juan, you had the Conqueror. I'm trying to remember what the other one was. just examples of people who just live life. They live it as much as they can. But then the artist, the fiction writer who writes about those, like when you read a book and it just connects with you. It connects with you in a way that, you know, oh, this is my life's problems, or this is, I can connect with the problem of the protagonist. I can connect with the troubles and the struggles. Um, I do kind of disagree because he puts kind of fiction at that highest level. I would say life is art, and I think that's the element of living your life the most, is that not all of us are going to be great artists or fiction writers. Not all of us are going to be great songwriters or, um, want to live the life of a Don Juan. I have some issues with like the Conqueror, that there's the myth of Sisyphus left me with a kind of amoral philosophy, right? And that I wouldn't say it turned me off, but it left something missing, because that's where all the other books for me in Camus come in and are important, because almost every single one of them deals gets confronted with a moral problem. You have Clements, I think, in The Fall, who says it. What do we want? We want grace, but we can't give ourselves grace, so we create dreadful rules. Um, because at the end of the day, we're constantly given these moral problems, and I don't want to make it uh, as simplified as a trolley problem. I don't think it's that simple, but in the end, you're stuck in this paradox, that, and Camus keeps butting up against it. You butt up against it in The Plague. You butt up against it, especially in A Stranger. I didn't get all the way through The Stranger. I really struggled with that book, but from what I did read, skimming through it, is as much as I couldn't connect with the main character, there was this really terrifying thing going on in the second half of the book where people were willing to let him off for this heinous act if he would just show some uh,
Remorse.
remorse.
Uh,
Not just remorse, but, you know, acting how they think, a normal person should. And it really brings up the question, is in that book, is the moral question about the protagonist or more about the rest of our society. And Camus' books kind of do work that way, in a way. You got anything to add?
well, I'm thinking about the plague, and I've always been very drawn to the character of Bernard Rieu, the physician who is the narrator of the various events. Uh, and he rejects the idea that there is a God, and with that, he rejects the idea that there's some meaning that's given to us. And what he ultimately says is, there is a great deal of suffering around me as this African seaport is under the thumb of this horrible plague. People are dying, and children are dying, and some people survive. There's no rhyme or reason who's going to survive and who's going to die. But he says, that I'm going to live a life in which I attempt to assuage human suffering, and in that way, I think he creates meaning. I think one of the basic principles of existentialism in general, whether he's an existentialist or not, is the idea that there's no given meaning. As Jean-Paul Sartre said, uh, uh, there is no existence precedes essence. So there's no given human nature. There's no given set of values for us to live by. But out of our existence, out of our choices and our freedom, we are able to create meaning. And that to me is, I mean, that character in the play is very appealing to me.
Yeah, and the plague. I'm trying to remember the name of his friend. It started with a T. Uh,
Tarot,
yeah, he was kind of my favorite because that I'm gonna watch people. I'm gonna help. He helped the doctor,
yeah,
but his refusal to judgment, his refusal to kill. That he had gone down the revolutionary path and realized it led to basically the very thing he was fighting against.
yeah,
And I think that does become a theme in a lot of Camus' works, and in his own life when he was writing his papers, where he was arguing against um, the socialist revolution that was happening in Algeria because of the tactics they were using. And he's like, my mother lives there. I grew up there. Uh, but there was this moral dilemma, right, of people that had been exploited and would continue to be exploited versus, the from colonialism versus what they felt they had to do violence wise to make a change and eventually kick the French out of Algeria. And that these moral problems aren't simple, right? We were at the height of anti-communism and this great Red Scare that went beyond just the United States, and there was this element of Sartre. Can you take Sartre's place where he full on throated supported the revolutionaries regardless of who they killed? That those people deserve it, right? And you ask yourself, and for Camus, one of the things that comes out of Myth of Sisyphus is this appeal to life. And he very much didn't want to, he very passionate against the death penalty, that we don't have that kind of right
yes,
to take another's life. And and I think that's where the narrow focus of the absurd, I think, I wouldn't say it falls apart, but it hits a limit. It hits a limit of these moral questions are going to come, and how do you deal with it? A lot of Camus' writing had to deal with how we just create rules that tell us what's right and wrong, and we follow them blindly. Whether those are religious rules, whether those are cultural rules, whether those are, um, our cultural norms or state rules. And there's this element of justification because we can't feel like we get grace. That we have to justify that whether it's our behavior of our nation, we have to justify it to live with it, right? And if you live in the absurd, you don't get that justification.
no,
All right. So I think we've kind of narrowed it down, given a bit of a background of Albert Camus, and talked a bit about what the absurd is. Just real quickly, it's human desire for unity of meaning with the universe's refusal to give it to us. It's one paradox. And, in reading Camus' writings and then my own experiences life, I've been a combat veteran in Iraq in 2003 as an infantryman. And, you run into these moral dilemmas. And what are you going to do with it? And lots of times there's no good answers. And we all want to be the good guy, right? And if we can't make the good guy decision and we justify our behaviors to give us a narrative that we're still the good guy, that we are, you know, that what we did was justified, even when it's, you know, really poor behavior. So what I did is I just kind of came up with a few more paradoxes to add to the absurd. Gives it more complexity, for sure, but it also and it gives it more complexity, and at the same time still gives you no answers. Because I
Right.
I think that's part of life is you don't necessarily get the answers. You muddle your way through the best you can. And so I'm going to quickly just kind of go over them, what they
Okay.
are. I have what I like to call the paradox of knowledge and skepticism, which this will tend to be more of an academic argument on paradox. But one of the things that came out for me when I was studying um, epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge, is like I'm sitting in class. We've been over all these discussions about how to get the truth. And I'm like, why are we arguing about God? Like, like the structure of these arguments was almost the exact same arguments the atheists and the theists have about God. And and when you wanted to get down to like say what you might first causes or first principles or foundational truths or what we can call truth with a capital T, oh my gosh, you end up with almost a you know you end up with these arguments that very much resemble arguments for and against God. Can we have them? Can't we have them? That's one of the paradoxes. Skepticism plays a big role in there, but maybe doesn't, not the way most people would think. Then you have the paradox of ego. This is more, this is what I was talking about earlier. This narcissistic rabbit hole, this ego problem where how we treat people very much depends on how we value them. And in some cases, there's no value, people you don't know, strangers. In many cases, it might be someone you dislike, someone you hate, someone you love, somebody you care deeply about. And what'll end up happening is you end up putting people above you or below you. But we've talked to in our reading groups quite a bit about ego and like Eastern philosophies. So I think Buddhism definitely deals with this. Like it's almost entirely based around this idea of no self, the illusion of self, and ego, how it separates us from those around us, and how it, in that sense, allows us to give ourselves justification for behaviors that, you know, aren't necessarily the best. Because even when you value someone higher than you, you'll end up devaluing yourself, and then you'll won't take care of yourself, or you'll allow them to manipulate you to behave in ways that are cruel, mean, to others. One of the problems I had just focusing in on like tantra and Buddhism was very much this idea of reaching nirvana and losing the self. Now, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. We could say Siddhartha Gautama, when he reached enlightenment, still had an ego, but he had no attachment to it. And I think that's an important point, is that this paradox has to do with how do we deal with the fact to live in this world, to engage in this world requires ego, while at the same time that very ego can lead us to, really tribalism. This is my group, that's your group, or thinking too highly of ourselves, or feeling entitled, or, even devaluing ourselves to the point of debasement and losing uh, kind of self control. And then the third one is and I think this is the one that's important, kind of for me, and the one that presents like the biggest challenge to us is what I like to call the paradox of good and evil. And I like to think of it through the myth of Adam and Eve, that it wasn't just a tree of knowledge. It was a tree of knowledge of good and evil. That what separated us from the animals, what got us kicked out of Eden, was moral judgment. Judgment. This is right. That is wrong. Uh, this is this is what the righteous is. This is what this is what is the good. This is and that's and the paradox is you can't escape judgment. To live life is to make judgments every day, and yet at some point those judgments get codified. They end up in, this is your book. You want to I don't want to be flippant about it, but you want to go to heaven. Here's the rules you abide by, right? Or, even when those rules get broken because maybe you're listening to a charismatic leader who leads you astray. But that so much justification comes out of what we decide is right and wrong, what we decide is good and evil, that allows us to become the very thing we're fighting. Isn't Nietzsche that says, if you fight monsters, beware you don't become one?
That's right.
I don't believe it. I don't believe you can. I think that's the very nature of the beast, is fighting monsters as you become one. When you decide who's good and evil, is that you become the evil to the other person, or you become the evil to the other group. That it's inevitable. That you get these lines of principles that no one's willing to budge on, and you end up in conflict. The whether and you can look at situational things, because I don't think you know that I don't think that what might be good or evil is relative. I think we have a tendency to understand evil more when we see it, when we feel it, than we do what is good. Because what is good today might not be good tomorrow. So those are the three paradoxes. And I assume maybe we dive into them a little bit. How are we doing on time, Fraser?
Well, we've been talking for about 35 minutes.
So no, we're running out of time. So maybe we have a little bit of discussion, because I know I have a lot more here that I wanted to kind of dive into each one of them.
Well, there's always a possibility of making some more videos. Um, I think, though, that you've given a good overview. And my question is, before we actually get into um, some specifics on these various paradoxes, um, you said that one of the reasons you wanted to make this video and perhaps make additional videos is for your three sons. And so, um, what could you tell them at this point um, that would give them advice or guidance for living their lives? How does the philosophical analysis that you're engaged in, and the philosophical inquiry that you're engaged in, how will that help them?
Well, I think that we talked about Camus, and I think the myth of Sisyphus is really good for. We're all going to end up in times in our lives when things just we're really going to struggle to get through them, right? And in the end of the day, life is worth living. It's worth engaging with. Um, that there may come a point, I'm struggling with my cancer, but while you can to live life, but what the paradox is, the additional ones, is how we engage with life. So the skeptic's paradox, right? The skeptic's paradox inside of this, the paradox of knowledge, is that the skeptic has to be skeptical of his own skepticism. And the
Right.
reason that's important is because one of the things I find very interesting is even amongst, uh, professional philosophical writings is this tendency to equate the skeptic with the conspiracy theorist. The conspiracy theorist isn't a skeptic. They're just trying to sell you something else. I think it's good to be skeptical. What the skeptic does is he doesn't give the philosopher, he doesn't give the whether the humanist, the rationalist, truth with a capital T. But it doesn't mean that the search for truth isn't important. Doesn't mean that facts aren't important. Uh, doesn't mean that my disbelief in gravity means I can go jump off a cliff and be okay. you
Right.
know,
Well, I think one of the major values of skepticism is that it warns us against those people who claim to have absolute certainty.
yes,
The skeptic is, in a way, very modest in making any kind of claims because I think the skeptic realizes that on a practical level, there's a huge danger in absolutism. It's a huge danger in making claims that you know the truth and it's absolute. And if other people don't accept it, well, tough for them. And in fact, all of the horrible things that human beings have done to other human beings, more often than not, arise out of uh, that belief in some kind of absolute truth, which is going to save you, is going to liberate you, is going to free you. And the skeptic is always saying, watch out for those kinds of claims. Watch out. Uh,
so I mean, just from that one alone, right? So whether it's in science, like it's very easy to accept, certain things from science as absolute truths just because they're so successful. And what the skeptic does, and I think a lot of scientists actually do understand this, is that it's not all absolute truth, but it's reliable, right? That when you compare it to all the other knowledge of the world, it's knowledge we can rely on.
right.
But that gets trickier the farther and farther you get away from the hard sciences. And at the end, like when you get to the other end of the spectrum, life is art. That like there just isn't an absolute certainty you can hold on to. So that's one of it, right? It demands a humility of us.
Yes, yes.
And then when it comes to ego, is the paradox of ego is that there ego and the absurd kind of, you know when you're talking about like Buddhist type no self, there's almost a retreat from the world, almost like Tarek from the plague, where you make no judgment. um Yet absurdism would call us to engage more with the world. I think there's a tendency between those. You need to find a balance. That what your ego is today, who you are today, isn't necessarily who you are tomorrow. Um, that to maintain an openness to not devalue others, don't devalue yourself. There's a fight. Like this was a massive change to my own behavior when I noticed this, because it's something that takes practice. That I have to practice in my mind and my thoughts, that regardless of what I think of other people, they hold the same intrinsic value that I do, no matter how horrible they are. And this is hard to do.
Very
This is hard to
difficult.
do
Extremely
when you
difficult.
see people when you see people destroying the world around you, and you want, and this is where the third paradox comes in, right? Because judgment isn't optional. Whether you don't make judgment, which is a judgment in itself, or make decisions, you're presented with moral problems, and you're going to have to make moral judgments for better or worse in this life, and that you want to be engaged. You want to be as knowledgeable as you can be, going back to the paradox of knowledge. You want to be as non-ego driven as possible. But at some point you got to live by principles, right? I like to think of it is there's no prescription for what the right principles are. But I think there's like behaving morally without being a moral man, right? Searching for wisdom without being wise. That
Yes.
demand of humility, that not just that circumstances change, not just that perspectives change, but that there is intrinsic value in human dignity. That really, the paradox of good and evil is about maintaining our humanity, to not give up our judgments to somebody else. That we have to own them. We have to own the consequences. That our intent, that the means and the consequences, they all matter.
Right.
Every step of the way. You could be as well intentioned as possible, doing the most correct means as possible, and end up with horrible outcomes.
Right.
That if millions of people die because you have a great idea about uh, farming, making all farming communal, and it creates famines, well, was that an evil decision? Maybe not by intent, but by consequences, yes.
Right.
That suffering, and it challenges, I think, challenges us to not look away from the suffering around us, to live life as an art, but to not turn away. I think, the world is overwhelming. It can be real easy to get in your field of expertise, and then you're going to let somebody else, whether it's your religious group or your group of friends, kind of decide what your politics are, or kind of decide what, your moral values are. And that can be rough when you have, maybe you realize you're in a situation where your values don't align, but going against them means being kicked out of the group, right? That there are times to make a stand. And I am as much anti-violence as I can be, but there is in this world sometimes an inevitability to defense. And where that line gets drawn, we don't know. I truly believe violence not just causes suffering to others, but dehumanizes ourselves,
Yes.
even when it's done for the best of reasons. That you end up, the paradox of good and evil is that there's no real justification other than doing your best, other than trying to really care about people, to treat them as the same as you.
Well, the Dalai Lama said that ultimately the most important thing is being kind, kindness. And that's certainly the way you're talking right now, again, goes back to the sort of philosophy that Ryu, the doctor, the physician in the plague holds. He's resisting the evil of the plague. He's doing what he can to assuage human suffering, recognizing that it can never be completely eradicated, uh, but doing his best to just from day to day try to help those people who are suffering so with this terrible pestilence.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's part of the paradox of good and evil is that original sin, right? Is a situation where this kind of evil is going to arise again and again and again. And just like Sisyphus rolling his rock up his hill, it's going to be the duty of men and women to resist.
What do you think about the way Camus ends the myth of Sisyphus? He says, in the final analysis, I think in the end, we can consider Sisyphus happy.
You know, it's, I think from his perspective, that Sisyphus achieved his goal. I don't know if I would say an eternity of suffering is happiness. I think there's a bit of a trap with happiness, right? That was it William James, the what produces the most happiness, or was that someone else?
Well, that's
M-
Mill, Bentham, the
Mills and Bentham,
utilitarians.
yeah.
Yeah, the
That
utilitarians ultimately look at consequences as determining moral correctness. You know, as opposed to someone like Kant who says we have certain duties and we completely ignore the consequences of our acts. We do what our duty demands. And the utilitarians, on the other hand, say, no, you've really got to look at consequences. The greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people, the principle of utilitarianism.
yeah, and I don't think that happiness is necessarily the ultimate goal. Uh, and I do think there's a place for duty. I think that's why it's always a paradox, right?
Yeah,
That one of the things about the paradox, right, is I can believe in the greater good, doing things for the greater good, whether that's happiness or eudaimonia. I never get the word right. Eudaimonia.
utilitarianism.
Well, the word from Aristotle and Plato.
Eudaimonism?
Yeah, Eudaimonism. But I think there are times for duty. There's times to stand on your principles, but there's an element of like flexibility, right? There's an art to understanding when the principle and the duty's gone too far. When lying is because when not lying becomes the evil, right? Uh, it's not to say that lying is as good as telling the truth. It's just saying that understanding there are situations, there are times when telling the truth can be evil.
Yeah, can have very serious, painful consequences, evil consequences. Yeah,
Yeah, it's understanding that and that everything's always shifting. That life is like one of the things in the army we had was called the fog of war, right? Where you just don't know, right? And life is kind of like that. And you
yeah, the
do
fog of
everything you
life.
can to build your knowledge, and you do everything you can to have experience that gives you some sort of guidelines. But at the same time, understanding you just don't always know the exact right situation and what the exact right answer is.
Right.
And that's what this real challenge to my children or anybody who's listening is that element of living with that that I can't give you what the right answer is. If I was to say anything, look out for suffering. Look at look out for those who cause suffering. Look out for
Yeah.
uh, that how people are treated around you. And I get it. We can get caught up in what's effective and what's not. But at the end of the day, it's we're all in this boat together. I think that was kind of the thing that came out of the plague, right? That
Right.
humanity is all in this boat together. We're all human beings, and I
Right.
and I think in expanding the absurd is a challenge to keep our humanity, a challenge to consciously engage with our own humanity, and not get so caught up in one purpose or one goal that we're willing to sacrifice others And that's what I was saying earlier about I can believe in the greater good, yet, you know, Ursula K. Le Guin's short story, Those Who Leave Omelas, despite believing in the greater good, walk away from a city that whose entire structure is built on the suffering of one child.
Mm.
That there are limits to what the greater good is, and there may be times when standing for one person is more important.
Well, Jonathan, this has been a very interesting conversation. And I just want to say that I think you are a very thoughtful person. And I'm really impressed by the fact that you've been such a warrior in dealing with your illness, and that despite the fact that you are currently, in pain, that you are willing to talk about your ideas and offer them up to people who are receptive to receive them, and to 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 to, to leave this as a kind of testament to who you are as a person for your kids.
I'm still just doing my best to stay engaged with life.
And I think that's
It's
wonderful.
not easy every day.
No, it certainly is not. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Fraser. I appreciate you helping me with this and kind of keeping me on track. It really did help.
And we may want to come back and talk about some of these points in more depth. But
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. And if we have a little bit of time and I can kind of dive back into, detailing them out more, I think we could easily cover, each paradox like 15, 20 minutes worth on it.
And one thing that I would be very interested in hearing is your experience of being over in Iraq, and the kinds of experiences you had that engaged you in this kind of deep thinking about what you were doing, the consequences of what you were doing. Um, I think that would be a very interesting topic for a whole discussion.
Yeah, no, I think part of it did kind of come back to uh affect me later. And at the time I think I was like a lot of people where using normal standard societal justification, right? For what was going on, what things happened. Uh but also, there was just this weird thing where you felt alive when you were in that situation, when you were faced with potential imminent death or serious injury. Uh, and it was something I struggled with a long time after I got back.
Well, that would be an interesting topic of conversation for a later date.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe that's a bit of a preview. Maybe that's
Right,
something we
right,
discuss before we go into the others.
right.
All
Take
right.
care, Jonathan.
Take care, Fraser. Thank you.
Bye bye.